like Madagascar, where these creatures can evolve in isolation and remain virtually unchanged since way prehistoric times. And these are little aquatic islands of warm water that could have species that were either wiped out everywhere else on Earth or exist nowhere else on Earth. And you're right. On one hand, we could be losing, besides the just horrific environmental aspects of that you could go on and on about, we could be losing great zoological finds when these like little pockets of isolated basically biospheres are dismantled. But also, we could be unleashing things, and I think you're kind of hinting at this, into the greater environment that might be extremely detrimental. We don't know.
We don't. That's the whole problem. And, not just that, all the bacteria, we could be really setting ourselves up, what could be happening, a year or 2 or 3 down the road, if not even sooner.
No, the implications are terrifying on a lot of different levels, not the least of which, if you can pilot a boat through Antarctica, that is a huge problem that has implications for all of the human race. And that is horrifying on its face.
Well, I tell you one thing, to be honest with you, I wouldn't buy any property. No property in Florida.
Yeah, no, coastal property, you might be living inland and you might have beachfront property by the end of the decade if we're all not lucky, unfortunately.
Well, I don't, just to change the subject just for a second, it seems like here in the last couple of months, the EPA has been virtually stripped, virtually of all its employees, all the laws, to protect our environment for all these presidents and all, Congress and all this stuff through the years is all starting to be stripped away. And that, has really got me concerned, not just with us, but the wildlife, the sea life, all this stuff. It's going to affect us so drastically.
Oh, absolutely. The EPA has an essential mission. That's not really, it's not about a liberal or conservative agenda at all. It's about the preservation of where we live and the health of all of us that exist in the environment. And that's it. Every Republican, every Democratic president, most of them, at least throughout my lifetime, have done things to bolster it. To have such a short-sighted agenda to create, a few jobs and to induce some, companies to do things economically, to do this kind of damage for those goals seems to me to be not only very short-sighted, but anti-human, frankly.
Well, I just find it totally crazy. It's just so many weird things it's going on. And it's like almost every week, they're relaxing this law, they're relaxing that law. And, pretty soon we're not going to have a place to really put our home on or to put our feet down. And that's where I'm getting concerned, especially now, like with Japan considering dumping all that radioactive waste in the Pacific Ocean. Right now, they're finding radiation in fish, up here in Washington, Oregon coast. So, what's going to happen after they dump a massive amount?
It's terrifying. There's just no other way to say it. When people stop looking forward, at what point do you stop caring about your children and grandchildren to the point where the convenience of the moment usurps the health of your species, of all the species on Earth? But even if you just want to be, egocentric, if you're just worried about the human race alone, I don't understand why you would be so narrow-minded as to go for an easy out when you understand how detrimental it could be to the place where we all have to live, and our children have to live, and our grandchildren have to live. It makes no sense to me.
Well, on the other hand, though, we might have some new type of creatures coming out of the ocean. Maybe those great big huge octopus and squids that used to go around those old sailing ships, Well, we might have that reoccurrence with going around great big ships. I don't know.
As much as, and I do love me, a giant Japanese rubber monster movie. I cannot pretend that I do not absolutely adore the genre of kaiju. But that having been said, I really don't want it to happen this way, because really what it means is higher leukemia rates and some poor, like, triple-eyed, three-finned fish that slowly, die through asphyxiation because they can't function in the water. So as much as I hope this inspires a whole new round of great giant monster movies, I really hope in reality people are inspired to fight this tooth and nail and to keep our waters as clean as possible.
Well, I don't know. I think we're gone to past the tipping point. But hey, things like you all these things you talk about on your podcasts. How about Mothman and black-eyed children and stuff like that? Does that ever come up on your podcast?
Absolutely. In the podcast, we cover everything from what we do basically is every week we take one situation, either one monster, one alien, or a phenomenon, and sort of tackle it. I do all the research, which is the research I put into. I use, like I say, all my old school journalism skills. I talk to the eyewitnesses that I can find. I find all the stuff I can find on the internet and the library, and just collate it all. And then we break down the story, and then we talk about it. And so each week, like say, we take one phenomenon and just really try to break it down. Usually some of the more esoteric ones. Mothman certainly counts. We're going to be doing the Black-Eyed Kids soon. I wrote an article for the website Mysterious Universe about that a few years ago, and it was really, that's a very fascinating thing. I mean, it's terrifying. It has all the earmarks. If your audience doesn't know, Black-Eyed Kids are this phenomenon where people are in their home or in their car, and they hear a knocking on the door, and they look through the peephole, or sometimes a woman was in her bedroom reading and there was a knock on her window, and these children are imploring them to be able to come inside to use the phone. Or if you're in your car, and this was the very first encounter with Black-Eyed Kids, it was a man in his car who was doing some reading, and they're like, "Could you give us a ride?" And of course, the instinct for most people when a child is in trouble is to help. I mean, that's the general human instinct. We like to protect our own, and we like to especially protect the young. But people that have this experience, they have this uneasy feeling. A lot of times the kids are thin and scraggly. They tend to have hoodies that like are dipped low on their face, and with good reason, because even though mostly they don't notice it at first, those that are more aware or are able to sort of resist this sort of almost siren song of their voice, because they say their hands are heading towards the door. They have this drive to let them in, but if they can resist it for just a second, they notice that these kids have black doll's eyes. I feel like Quint describing Jaws, like shark's eyes, lifeless eyes. But that's basically what they describe, these jet black, inky wells that they just sort of sink into. And then the people that are lucky enough not to have already opened the doors have this rush of terror, and they usually slam the door or shut the window or refuse. Now, it seems like these entities, whatever they are, some people think they're demonic, some people think they're vampires, some people think they're spectral. I mean, there's no real consensus on what they are, except that almost everyone universally feels, especially those that experience it, that it is pure evil and that it has some very nefarious intentions. Once they're able to shut them out, these things can't get in. They just keep asking, and most of the time people just shut the door, sometimes they plug their ears, they hope that they go away, and eventually they do. Perhaps the scariest encounter I read was somebody who encountered these kids on their way out of a men's room on the way to a solo camping trip, which is something I don't know if I can highly recommend anyway, going alone camping. But this guy continued on his trip, and when he was alone in the woods in his tent, they were outside the tent asking for access, saying that they were cold, that they needed some help. And he just remembered those black eyes and this kind of gut-level terror, this panic that comes from a primal place, not a place of like they're scary because they're weird or maybe they're wearing contact lenses. All the things your rational mind would think, that goes out the window. It's this instinctive horror at what these things might be. And what scares me most is that there is not a single account of someone that actually let them in. There are no accounts of I let them in and they tormented me, or they tried to frighten me, or they tried to hurt me. Never a single account of someone that actually let them in the car or the home, which implies to me that those that let them in maybe don't get to tell their stories.
That's a possibility, because you look at all the people missing, in the forest, the author of the 411 book, people gone in the forest and went missing.
Right.
We're talking a huge amount. And then if you look at this, how many people go missing just going to the grocery store and never found again. I remember listening on another talk show. Actually, it was a friend of mine's talk show who's passed. But I remember one night he had a person talking about, black-eyed children. And one of them was where the guy was going into his car. He worked in a mall, and it was late at night, and it was raining. And he goes to get into his car, and all of a sudden, a couple black-eyed children appear, saying they're cold. They went into his car, and he noticed their eyes. And he got scared, and he wouldn't let them in, and he drove off, and, they all of a sudden vanished. But you never know. If you let them in, maybe whoever does, they never heard of again. Maybe they're one of the missing. I don't know what they are. But boy, they've been reported all over, everywhere, not just in our country, all over the world.
It's absolutely true. And it's a phenomenon that's still a relatively recent one. It's less than a decade old that the first accounts started coming, which to me, as a crypto historian, is fascinating because a lot of times legends like this, be it of wild men in the woods or certainly of unidentified flying objects, they go back to a prehistoric time. And they've always been with us, but this is a relatively recent thing, so you have to wonder. That's why some people think they might be associated with extraterrestrials. Again, many people think they're demonic manifestations or something else, but the fact that it's still a relatively recent phenomenon to me is just one part of what's so fascinating about it. And also that sort of hypnotic lure of their voices. Like, almost to the last, people say that they have a real instinct, as terrified as they are, they really want to let them in, which to me is sort of like I was saying earlier, the siren song of these creatures or these entities or these individuals. I don't think they're human based on what people seem to describe. It seems like that's the mask they're wearing, and then, of course, the mask of a child to make them further endearing. But what their intentions are is unknowable, just that what they inspire is fear. And usually when a human being has a gut instinct of terror, I'm not saying that we aren't sometimes as a species quick to fall to fear and violence. Rod Serling taught us that lesson over and over again, that we shouldn't judge a book by its cover. But a lot of times when we have this gut visceral instinct, be it a snake or a spider, it's because there's something inherently dangerous. It's one of the few instincts we actually have, one of the few things we don't necessarily need to learn from our parents and our communities, because human beings don't have a lot of instincts. But if you feel an outright terror about something, it's usually pretty good to trust that instinct.
Oh, yeah. And the thing is, if you had some older man or an older woman come up to your door, or a group of them, like 2 or 3 of them, right? And they're saying they're cold, they want in, and if you then notice they have black eyes, you're not going to have that little where you feel sorry for them, where you want to nurture. With young kids, you have this, you feel sorry, you want to nurture them, you want to help them. And that's the eerie part, that they want in either your car, or your house. And that's what's the scary part is. I wouldn't myself. If one came up to my door, I wouldn't let him in. I don't want to be one of the people missing. I don't want to find out. But the reason why too stuff gets around, and it, is because of the internet. Before the internet, people had to write about it, or it was in the newspaper and stuff. Like the newspapers wouldn't carry stuff like this. But now when somebody sees a sighting of a black-eyed children or a Mothman or a Bigfoot or an alien, it gets out, to tens of thousands or tens of millions of people really fast.
Oh, absolutely. The dissemination of information is astonishing. And in many ways, it's a huge positive. Sometimes it's a negative, especially when it comes to hoaxes and other shady things or negative propaganda. But when it comes to someone who's a researcher like myself, like I've been on field expeditions. I've been to Honey Island Swamp in Louisiana looking for the legendary Honey Island Swamp monster. I've been on expeditions in South Africa. But for the most part, like I say, I consider myself a crypto historian. What my interest is in, like say, gathering these stories from as many sources as possible and putting them together using, again, the skills I've built up over the years as a reporter to make rational sense of it, and then lay sort of a groundwork for academics of the future, be they field researchers or anthropologists, whatever it may be, just trying to study the zeitgeist of the time so that they can do something with it. So I